In the first 100 years of the movement, there was no monolithic Christianity. There was only a chaotic ecosystem of highly diverse, competing Christianities. Most modern readers assume the New Testament arrived as a continuous historical record, a unified narrative delivered from the heavens. In reality, the biblical text is a highly curated, actively engineered theological construct. This engineered version of belief, orthodoxy, was established at two distinct levels. The first level is micro-editorial, involving the active splicing and alteration of the individual texts. The second level is macro-technological, the physical enforcement of the 27-book biblical canon. The Bible we read today is not a spontaneous record of uniformity, but the surviving architecture of a deliberate, centuries-long filtering process. At the micro level, the gospel authors did not work as objective historians. They functioned as theological editors. They utilized pre-existing oral traditions and written sources, cutting them apart and splicing them together to create specific architectural themes. We can find the seams of this process in the book of Acts, specifically in the story of the martyr Stephen in chapters 6 and 7. Throughout Acts, the author, commonly known as Luke, promotes a specific theology. He portrays the early movement as deeply loyal to the temple and the Jewish law. Yet Luke embeds a pre-existing source text within his narrative, Stephen's speech, that aggressively attacks the temple and demotes the authority of the law. This block of Greek text contains that speech, arguing the law was delivered by angels, not God. The narrative seam here is rough. Luke writes that the anti-temple accusations against Stephen are false, but then includes the speech itself, which confirms every accusation. This editorial seam proves that early Christian texts housed wildly competing, unreconciled theologies within a single document. These editorial choices were used to shape Christology, the specific theological understanding of Jesus' nature and purpose. The Gospel of Mark explicitly defines Jesus' death as a transactional ransom for sins. Luke actively omits this ransom concept. He edits his narrative to portray Jesus strictly as an innocent prophet and a martyr. No single unified theology of Jesus existed across the early movement. Authors were constructing their preferred versions through calculated editorial choices. This perspective scales up from contradictions within a single text to massive factional divides across the ancient world. In the West, the Proto-Orthodox movement centralized its influence in Rome, but across Syria and the western coast of India, a rival faction known as Thomasine Christianity held its own strongholds. These believers possessed unique texts like the Gospel of Thomas and believed Jesus literally had a twin brother named Judas Thomas. Thomasine texts completely bypassed the crucifixion and resurrection narratives, focusing instead on secret, esoteric sayings. In the 2nd century, these groups did not view themselves as heretics. They were equally legitimate variations of faith competing for survival. The pressure to organize and defend these theological boundaries arrived around 160 CE, led by a wealthy shipbuilder named Marcion. Marcion argued that the creator God of the Jewish scriptures was a bungling, evil deity. He taught that the father of Jesus was a completely separate God of mercy who had nothing to do with the physical world. Marcion took the unprecedented step of creating the first formal canon, an exclusive list of sacred texts designed to enforce his theology. His list eradicated the Old Testament entirely, keeping only a heavily edited version of the Gospel of Luke and 10 letters from Paul. This aggressive curation proved to rival sects that whoever controls the approved list of texts controls the future of the religion. Marcion's exclusionary list forced proto-Orthodox leaders to defensively define their own boundary of acceptable books. Until this point, the dominant format for scripture was the papyrus or parchment scroll seen here. The scroll is physically open-ended. If a community's scripture is a loose collection of scrolls in a box, it is effortlessly easy to add a new text or set an old one aside. Fixing that theological boundary required a complete change in the physical hardware of the text itself, the invention of the bound codex. In a codex, pages are cut, ordered, and permanently bound together on a single spine. This structure forces a theological binary. A text is either physically bound inside the covers, confirming its sacred status, or left outside, marking it as heresy. The Codex provided a physical mechanism of exclusion. It allowed leaders to lock the boundaries of orthodoxy into a single, unchangeable spine. Filling this new codex with a universally agreed-upon list of books took centuries of debate. The Muratorian Canon, compiled between 200 and 400 CE, was a messy early attempt to create a definitive list. This early list included books modern Christians reject, such as the Apocalypse of Peter. It also explicitly rejected books now considered foundational, such as the Book of Hebrews. The definitive historical benchmark arrived in 367 CE, in the Easter letter of Bishop Athanasius. Athanasius's letter is the first historical instance, 3 full centuries after the life of Jesus, where the exact 27 books of the modern New Testament are listed together. The New Testament canon was the result of a contested 300-year process of human consensus. Texts were not included in the Bible simply because they were verifiably written by the original 12 apostles. Almost all the canonical Gospels were published anonymously. Apostolic names were attached to them much later to grant them authority. The primary criterion for inclusion was theological acceptability to the proto-Orthodox leadership. The 27-book canon is a curated list compiled by the victors of the historical debate over what their religion should be. In 1945, the evidence of this debate resurfaced near Nag Hammadi, Egypt. These papyrus pages belong to 13 massive codices containing the lost Gospels of the defeated factions, including the Gospel of Thomas. These texts are the silenced voices of early diversity. They prove the New Testament canon was an engineered mechanism of survival, used to forge a monolithic orthodoxy out of a splintered world.